The warm summer air carried the scent of sage and dust as Katherine Porter pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the First Baptist Church of Willits, California. The afternoon sun blinded her momentarily, but not nearly as much as the shame burning in her chest. Behind her, the angry voices of the church elders still echoed in her mind, their judgment hanging around her neck like a noose. Fornicator, Jezebel, disgrace. Catherine Katie, to those who loved her, clutched her small valise tighter and fought to keep her chin raised as she descended the church steps. Her free hand instinctively moved to her belly, still flat beneath her Sunday dress, though it wouldn't remain so for long. The tiny life growing inside her was only 2 months along, but it had taken mere minutes for 18 years of devotion to be erased from the minds of her congregation. Willits in 1883 was no place for an unwed pregnant woman. The logging town nestled in the heart of Mendocino County was governed by strict moral codes that left no room for her situation. Not that Katie had planned to fall in love with the handsome railroad surveyor who had passed through town last spring, charming her with tales of San Francisco and promises of returning to marry her. 3 months had passed since James had left, and Katie now understood those promises had been as empty as her future looked. The small town's main street stretched before her, its familiar wooden boardwalks and storefronts suddenly feeling foreign. Where could she go? Her parents had made their position painfully clear after Pastor Wilkins had informed them of her condition. Her father's face had turned a dangerous shade of purple as he'd ordered her to leave their home immediately. No daughter of mine would bring such disgrace upon our family. Katie blinked back tears as she walked aimlessly down the dusty road, the weight of her situation pressed down on her shoulders. At 18, with only a few dollars saved from working at the general store, her prospects were grim. Mrs. Sanderson at the boarding house wouldn't take her in, not with her reputation now in tatters. The only other option was the shanty houses on the edge of town, where women of questionable character resided. The thought made her shudder. She was so lost in her spiraling thoughts that she didn't notice the rider approaching until his horse's shadow fell across her path. Katie stepped aside, eyes downcast, hoping to avoid any more judgment. "Miss Porter, is everything all right?" The deep, slightly raspy voice belonged to Quincy Larson, whose cattle ranch lay a few miles outside of town. Katie had seen him around Willits. Of course, everyone knew of the Larson Ranch and its taciturn owner who kept mostly to himself, except for monthly trips into town for supplies. He was a few years older than her, perhaps 25, with shoulders broadened by hard work and eyes the color of the California sky. "I'm fine, Mr. Larson," she responded automatically, though her quivering voice betrayed her. Quincy dismounted in one fluid motion, his tall frame casting a longer shadow. Up close, she could see the concern etched on his tanned face, partially hidden beneath a well-trimmed beard. His eyes narrowed as he took in her reddened eyes and the small valise. "Pardon my forwardness, Miss Porter, but you don't look fine to me." Something about his direct but gentle manner broke through Katie's carefully constructed facade. Her shoulders slumped, and tears she'd been desperately holding back spilled over. "The church has cast me out," she whispered. "My family, too." Understanding dawned in Quincy's eyes. Though he rarely attended church himself, preferring to commune with God in the open spaces of his ranch, gossip traveled fast in small towns. He'd heard whispers about the Porter girl and a railroad man. "And where will you go?" he asked quietly. Katie's silence was answer enough. Quincy shifted his weight, hat in hand. He wasn't a man of many words. Life on a ranch didn't require extensive conversation, but seeing the young woman before him, abandoned by those who should protect her, stirred something in him. "Miss Porter Catherine," he began, his voice low. "My ranch is a good ways out of town. It's nothing fancy, just a simple cabin and the barn. But my door is always open if you need somewhere to stay while you figure things out." Katie's head snapped up, eyes wide with surprise and suspicion. She'd already trusted one man's seemingly kind intentions. Reading her expression, Quincy quickly added, "I've got a small cabin behind the main house. It's where my mother stayed in her final days. It's been empty these past 2 years. You'd have your privacy, and I'd expect nothing in return except maybe help with cooking now and then. My attempts at biscuits have been known to threaten the structural integrity of my teeth." His small attempt at humor earned a fleeting smile from Katie. Still, she hesitated. "Why would you help me? You hardly know me." Quincy shifted again, uncomfortable with having to explain his motivations. "My ma found herself in a similar situation once. Before she met my pa, I mean. The town she lived in wasn't as understanding. She nearly didn't survive it." He looked away toward the distant hills. "I reckon she'd have wanted me to offer help if I could." Katie studied him carefully. Quincy Larson wasn't like most men in Willits. He kept to himself, worked hard, and despite owning one of the more prosperous ranches in the county, lived modestly. People respected him, even if they found him standoffish. "I don't know when I could repay you," she admitted. "Wasn't asking to be repaid." He shrugged. "Besides, ranch cooking would be a welcome change from my own attempts. Consider it an even trade." Katie knew she had limited options, perhaps no options at all. The alternative was to try making it to San Francisco, where an unwed mother might find anonymity, but also dangers she couldn't imagine. At least she knew of Quincy Larson. His reputation in Willits was that of an honest if solitary man. "I accept your offer, Mr. Larson," she finally said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Thank you." Quincy nodded once as if the matter was settled. "Can call me Quincy." "Mr. Larson was my father." He took her valise and secured it to his saddle before offering his hand. "It's about an hour's ride to the ranch. Can you manage on horseback?" Katie nodded. "I grew up riding before I started working at the general store." Quincy helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her, careful to maintain a respectful distance while still ensuring she was secure. "Hold tight to the saddle horn," he instructed, and with a gentle click of his tongue, the horse set off at an easy pace. As they rode away from Willits, Katie felt a strange mixture of sorrow and relief. Behind her lay the only life she'd ever known. Ahead, uncertainty stretched like the winding road before them. The rhythmic sway of the horse and the solid presence of Quincy Larson behind her provided an unexpected comfort as they headed toward a future neither of them could have anticipated when the day began. The Larson Ranch came into view just as the afternoon shadows were lengthening across the valley. Katie had remained silent for most of the journey, overwhelmed by the day's events and uncertain about what awaited her. As they crested a small hill, she gasped softly at the sight before her. The ranch was nestled in a verdant valley, protected on 3 sides by rolling hills covered in oak and pine. A clear stream cut through the property, its banks lined with cottonwoods that provided welcome shade. The main house was larger than Katie had expected, a solid 2-story structure built of hewn logs and stone, with a wide porch wrapping around its front. A large barn stood nearby, along with several corrals and outbuildings. About 50 yards behind the main house, she could make out a smaller cabin, smoke curling lazily from its chimney. "It's beautiful," she murmured, breaking her long silence. Quincy made a noncommittal sound that might have been agreement. "Been in the family for 3 generations now. My grandfather came out from Missouri in '49, though he was looking for cattle land, not gold." As they approached, Katie noticed a tall, broad-shouldered man with silver-streaked dark hair emerge from the barn. His weathered face broke into a smile upon seeing Quincy, then registered surprise at the sight of Katie. "That's Emmanuel Ramirez," Quincy explained. "My foreman, been with the ranch longer than I've been alive." Emmanuel approached as Quincy helped Katie dismount. His dark eyes were kind but curious as they assessed her. "Senor Quincy," he greeted, then tipped his hat respectfully to Katie. "Senorita. Manny, this is Miss Katherine Porter. She'll be staying in Ma's cabin for a while," Quincy said, his tone making it clear he didn't intend to elaborate. To his credit, Emmanuel didn't press for details. He simply nodded. "I will tell Maria to prepare some food for our guest." He took the reins of Quincy's horse and led it toward the barn. "Maria is Emmanuel's wife," Quincy explained as he retrieved Katie's valise. "She helps with the cooking and keeping the house in order." He gestured for Katie to follow him. "I'll show you to the cabin." As they walked, Katie felt her anxiety return. She was suddenly very aware of her situation alone at her remote ranch with men she barely knew. As if sensing her unease, Quincy kept a respectful distance as he led her to the small cabin. "This was built when my mother took ill," he explained as he pushed open the door. "The main house was too noisy with ranch business, and she wanted a peaceful place to rest." The cabin was simple but clean, with one main room containing a small cast iron stove, a table with 2 chairs, and a rocking chair near the window. A curtain separated the living area from a small bedroom. Basic, homey furnishings suggested it had been maintained even after his mother's passing. "It's not much," Quincy said, setting down her valise. "It's perfect," Katie replied honestly. After the day's events, the quiet solitude of the cabin felt like sanctuary. Quincy cleared his throat. "Bathrooms out back, there's a pump for fresh water. Outhouse is a bit beyond that. Maria's stocked the pantry, but you're welcome to meals at the main house if you prefer company." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "I should mention, there are 4 ranch hands besides Emmanuel. Good men, all of them. They live in the bunkhouse by the barn and won't bother you none." Katie nodded, grateful for the information. "Thank you, Mr. Quincy, for everything." He shrugged, as if taking in a desperate pregnant woman was an everyday occurrence. "Get yourself settled. Maria will bring over some dinner in a bit." He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "Miss Porter, I meant what I said. My door's always open. Main house is never locked. If you need anything, day or night, don't hesitate." With that, he departed, leaving Katie alone in the quiet cabin. Only when the door closed behind him did she allow herself to sink onto the edge of the bed, emotions finally overwhelming her. She cried for everything she'd lost that day: her family, her church, her place in the community. When the tears finally subsided, she took a deep breath and looked around at her new temporary home. "This is where we'll stay for now," she whispered to her unborn child, resting her palm against her still flat abdomen. "It's going to be all right." As promised, Maria Ramirez arrived an hour later with a tray laden with food: a hearty beef stew, freshly baked bread, and a slice of apple pie. The middle-aged Mexican woman had kind eyes and a warm smile that immediately put Katie at ease. "Senor Quincy said you had a difficult journey," she said as she set down the tray. "Eat well, rest. Tomorrow is time enough for questions." Katie was grateful for Maria's tactful approach. "Thank you for the food. It smells wonderful," Maria smiled. "I will bring breakfast in the morning." "Is 7 too early?" "Not at all. I'm used to early mornings." "Good. Now eat before it gets cold." Maria patted Katie's shoulder before leaving. Alone again, Katie realized how hungry she was. She ate every bite, savoring the home-cooked meal, perhaps the last one she'd have in a long time that wasn't prepared by her own hands. As darkness fell, she lit the oil lamp and unpacked her meager belongings. The events of the day caught up with her, and exhaustion washed over her like a wave. As she lay in the unfamiliar bed that night, listening to the distant sounds of cattle and the soft hooting of an owl, Katie wondered what tomorrow would bring. For the first time in weeks, however, she felt something besides shame and fear, a tiny flicker of hope, fragile as a candle flame in the wind, but present nonetheless. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the cabin's east-facing window. Katie woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the events of the previous day came rushing back. She dressed quickly in one of her 2 serviceable dresses and tidied her long brown hair into a simple bun. By the time Maria knocked on the door with breakfast, Katie had already swept the cabin floor and washed her face in the basin. "Buenos dias," Maria greeted cheerfully, carrying a tray with steaming porridge, eggs, and coffee. "You slept well?" "Yes, thank you," Katie replied, realizing it was true. Despite her circumstances, she'd slept more soundly than she had in weeks, free from the constant worry of discovery. As Maria set down the tray, she studied Katie with motherly concern. "Senor Quincy said you might need work to keep busy. If you like, you can help me with laundry today. The men make much dirty clothes." Katie smiled gratefully. "I'd be happy to help. I don't want to be a burden." Maria waved away her concern. "No burden. Good help is welcome." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Between us, it is nice to have another woman on the ranch. Too many men, too much dirt, too little conversation." Katie laughed, surprised at how good it felt after so many weeks of misery. "I'll come to the main house after breakfast." True to her word, Katie spent the day helping Maria with the mountain of ranch laundry. The work was hard but satisfying, giving her hands purpose and her mind distraction. Maria chatted easily throughout the day, sharing stories about her 5 grown children who now lived in various towns across California, and her 8 grandchildren. "And how many months?" Maria asked quietly as they hung sheets on the line, her eyes gentle as they flickered to Katie's middle. Katie stiffened momentarily, then relaxed. Of course Maria would notice, women always did. 2 months, maybe a little more. Maria nodded without judgment. "Morning sickness. Some, not too bad. Good, I have tea that helps. We'll bring tomorrow." Maria secured a clothespin and added softly, "Children are blessing always, no matter how they come to us." Tears pricked at Katie's eyes at this simple acceptance. "Thank you," she whispered. Over the next week, Katie fell into the rhythm of ranch life. She helped Maria with cooking and cleaning, learned to make cheese from the milk of Quincy's small dairy herd, and even assisted Emmanuel in the garden where he grew vegetables for the ranch. The work kept her busy and tired her body enough that sleep came easily most nights. Quincy himself remained something of a mystery. He was often gone from sunrise to sunset, checking fences, moving cattle, or handling business in neighboring towns. When their paths crossed, he was unfailingly polite but maintained a careful distance. Katie often felt his eyes on her when he thought she wasn't looking, his expression unreadable. 10 days after her arrival, Katie was hanging laundry when she heard the pounding of hooves. Looking up, she saw Quincy riding hard toward the main house, his expression grim. He dismounted in a fluid motion and strode toward the porch where she stood. "Miss Porter," he said, removing his hat, "I've just come from Willett's." Katie's heart clenched. "Is something wrong?" "Nothing to worry over," he assured her quickly. "But I thought you should know there's talk in town about your situation and your whereabouts." Katie paled. "Do they know I'm here?" "Some suspect. Pastor Wilkins approached me outside the general store, suggested it wasn't proper for you to be staying at a bachelor's ranch. Quincy's jaw tightened. I told him my arrangements with my tenants weren't his concern. Tenants, Katie echoed. Seemed simplest to let him think you're paying rent. Might stop some of the talk. He shifted uncomfortably. There's something else. Your father was asking after you. Hope flared briefly in Katie's chest. He was. Did he want to know? Quincy cut her off gently. I'm sorry. He wanted to ensure you weren't spreading falsehoods about the family, said if anyone asked, they were to know you'd been sent to relatives back east. The hope died as quickly as it had risen. Of course her father wouldn't have had a change of heart. His reputation had always meant more to him than anything, even his only daughter. I see, she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. Thank you for telling me. Quincy studied her face. It doesn't change anything here. You're welcome to stay as long as you need. Katie nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. There's one more thing, he added hesitantly. Doc Sullivan was at the store too. When he heard you were likely here, he asked me to tell you he'd be happy to provide medical attention when the time comes. Said you shouldn't hesitate to call on him. Surprised, Katie looked up. Dr. Sullivan had been Willits's physician for as long as she could remember. He was a kind man who had treated her for childhood illnesses more times than she could count. He doesn't. Judge, Quincy finished for her. No, Sullivan's seen too much life and death to bother with such things. Said to tell you that you were always a good girl who helped nurse your mother when she had the influenza 2 winters back, and he hasn't forgotten. Tears welled in Katie's eyes. Thank you for telling me, she repeated, this time with genuine gratitude. Quincy nodded once, replaced his hat and turned to leave. He paused after a few steps. Miss Porter, Katherine, what those people think doesn't matter out here, just so you know. With that, he strode off toward the barn, leaving Katie to ponder his words and the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this place. As May turned to June, the days grew longer and hotter in the California Valley. Katie's body began to change, her dresses growing tighter around her middle as the life within her developed. Maria helped her let out her clothes, and together, they began sewing simple garments that would accommodate her changing shape in the months to come. Katie found herself increasingly drawn to the garden. There was something soothing about coaxing life from the soil, nurturing seedlings into plants that would eventually provide food for the table. Emmanuel, observing her natural talent with growing things, gradually turned more of the garden responsibility over to her. You have good hands for plants, señorita, he told her one evening as they surveyed rows of thriving vegetables. They respond to your touch. Katie smiled, pleased by the compliment. My grandmother taught me. She always said a garden feeds more than the body, it feeds the soul too. A wise woman, your grandmother, Emmanuel nodded. Like you. Katie wasn't sure about that. Wise women didn't find themselves unwed and pregnant at 18. But she kept this thought to herself, not wanting to seem ungrateful for Emmanuel's kindness. As Katie became more comfortable at the ranch, she began to notice the way it operated like a well-oiled machine under Quincy's quiet leadership. He never raised his voice to his men, yet they followed his instructions without question. He worked alongside them, never asking anyone to do something he wouldn't do himself. In the evenings, she often saw him at his desk in the study, poring over ledgers and correspondence, managing the business side of the ranch with the same diligence he applied to the physical work. One particularly hot afternoon, Katie was picking beans in the garden when dizziness overcame her. The world tilted alarmingly, and she found herself sitting abruptly on the ground, head spinning. The next thing she knew, strong arms were lifting her. Easy now, came Quincy's deep voice as he carried her toward the shade of a nearby oak. "You've been in the sun too long." Katie wanted to protest that she was fine, that she could walk on her own, but the words wouldn't form properly. Quincy set her down gently against the tree trunk and pressed a canteen of cool water into her hands. "Small sips," he instructed. She obeyed, the water reviving her slightly. As her vision cleared, she realized Quincy was kneeling beside her, his face etched with concern. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I don't know what happened." "Happened because you've been working in the midday heat," he said gruffly. "Not good for you or the baby." Katie looked away, embarrassed. "I need to earn my keep." Quincy's expression softened. "Katherine, you already do more than your share around here. Maria says the house has never been cleaner, and Emmanuel won't stop talking about how the garden's producing better than ever." "Still," she protested weakly, "I don't want to be a charity case." "Is that what you think this is?" Quincy sounded genuinely perplexed. "You're not a charity, Katherine. You're—" He paused, seemingly at a loss for words. "You're part of the ranch now." Something in his voice made Katie look up. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither spoke. Something unspoken passed between them, something Katie wasn't ready to name. Quincy cleared his throat and looked away first. "From now on, no gardening between 11 and 3. Doctor's orders." "You're not a doctor," Katie pointed out, a small smile tugging at her lips despite herself. "No, but I know heat exhaustion when I see it." He stood and offered his hand. "Come on. Maria's made lemonade and there's shade on the porch." Katie allowed him to help her to her feet, acutely aware of his calloused hand engulfing her smaller one. For a moment after she was standing, he didn't release her hand and she didn't pull away. Then, as if coming to his senses, Quincy let go and took a step back. "Thank you," Katie said softly, "for catching me before I fell." Something flickered in Quincy's blue eyes. "Always will," he replied, so quietly she almost didn't hear. The moment was broken by the dinner bell Maria rang from the main house. Quincy offered his arm for support, and together they walked slowly toward the sound, each lost in their own thoughts about what had just transpired. That evening, as Katie sat in the rocking chair outside her cabin, watching the sun sink below the western hills, she found her thoughts returning to Quincy Larson. When he'd first offered her shelter, she'd seen him as a kind stranger, perhaps even a temporary guardian angel sent to rescue her in her darkest hour. Now, nearly a month later, she was beginning to see him as a man, one whose rare smile could light up his entire face, whose hands could be gentle despite their strength, whose quiet integrity shaped everything around him. These thoughts frightened her. She'd already trusted her heart once and been devastated by the consequences. Besides, what could she possibly offer a man like Quincy? She was damaged goods in the eyes of society, carrying another man's child. Even if by some miracle he could see past that, she had nothing to bring to a relationship, no dowry, no family connections, not even her good name. And yet, when he'd looked at her beneath that oak tree today, she'd seen something in his eyes that made her wonder if perhaps her growing feelings weren't entirely one-sided. "Foolishness," she whispered to herself, forcefully pushing the thoughts away. "Pure foolishness." She had more important things to focus on, like the child growing inside her, and building a future where they could survive independently. Romantic daydreams about the ranch owner had no place in that plan. July brought a heat wave that transformed the valley into a shimmering haze. The ranch hands worked from dawn until the worst heat set in, then resumed their labors in the evening hours. Katie, now showing visibly in her 4th month, spent the hottest part of each day indoors, sewing baby clothes from fabric Quincy had brought back from a trip to Sacramento. One stifling afternoon, as Katie sat by the open window of the main house parlor, trying to catch any hint of breeze while she hemmed a small gown. Quincy appeared in the doorway. He looked uncharacteristically nervous, his hat in his hands. "Miss Porter, Catherine," he began, then stopped, seeming to gather his thoughts. Katie set aside her sewing. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing's wrong." He took a step into the room. "I was wondering if you might like to join me for a picnic supper this evening. There's a spot by the creek where it's cooler, and I thought you might enjoy the change of scenery." Katie stared at him, momentarily speechless. Was Quincy Larson asking her on what amounted to a social outing? Misinterpreting her silence, he quickly added, "Maria's packed the food already." "Nothing fancy. If you're too tired, I understand completely." "No," Katie found her voice. "I'd love to go. It sounds wonderful." Relief washed over his features. "Good, that's good. I'll come by your cabin around 6. Katie nodded, a smile spreading across her face. 6 it is. At precisely 6 o'clock, Quincy arrived at Katie's door. He'd changed from his work clothes into clean trousers and a fresh shirt, his hair still damp from washing. Katie had done her best with her limited wardrobe, choosing her blue dress that best accommodated her changing figure, and pinning her hair in a style that framed her face. The look of appreciation in Quincy's eyes when she opened the door told her the effort hadn't been wasted. "You look lovely," he said simply, offering his arm. Katie felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you." They walked in comfortable silence toward the creek, Quincy carrying the picnic basket in his free hand. The evening was still warm, but a gentle breeze had begun to stir, bringing relief from the day's oppressive heat. The spot Quincy had chosen was perfect, a grassy bank beneath the spreading branches of an old cottonwood, where the creek widened into a natural pool. The water burbled soothingly over rocks, and dragonflies darted above the surface. "It's beautiful here," Katie said as Quincy spread a blanket on the grass. "My favorite place on the ranch," he admitted, setting down the basket. "Used to come here as a boy when I wanted to be alone. Still do sometimes." Katie felt honored that he would share this personal retreat with her. "Thank you for bringing me." They settled on the blanket, and Quincy began unpacking the basket: cold chicken, biscuits, pickled vegetables, and a jar of lemonade. As they ate, conversation flowed more easily than Katie would have expected, given Quincy's usual reticence. He told her stories about growing up on the ranch, about his father teaching him to ride almost before he could walk, about his mother who loved poetry and would read aloud to him in the evenings. Katie shared memories of her own childhood happier times before her mother's health had begun to fail, before her father had grown increasingly rigid in his religious views. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Katie found herself relaxing completely for the first time in months. There was something about Quincy's quiet presence that made her feel safe, valued. "May I ask you something?" she ventured during a lull in conversation. "Of course. Why have you never married? She hesitated, feeling suddenly bold. A good man with a prosperous ranch. Surely there have been interested women in Willits." Quincy looked out across the creek, seemingly contemplating his answer. "There were a few, I suppose," he finally said. "Never felt right, though. My parents had something special, a real partnership. Pa used to say Ma was the best thing that ever happened to him. Said he'd rather be alone than settle for less than what they had." He shrugged. "Guess I feel the same." Katie nodded, understanding. "My parents weren't like that. My father always made the decisions. My mother just went along." "And you?" Quincy asked, his eyes returning to her face. "What kind of marriage would you want? If things had been different, I mean." The question caught Katie off guard. She'd been so focused on her immediate predicament that she hadn't allowed herself to think that far ahead. "I'd want a partnership too," she said slowly. Someone who valued my thoughts, who saw me as an equal, someone kind. She looked down at her hands. Not that it matters now. No respectable man would have me, not with another man's child. You don't know that, Quincy said, his voice oddly intense. Katie gave him a sad smile. I know how the world works, Quincy. Women like me don't get second chances. Then the world is wrong, he said firmly. Before Katie could respond, a distant rumble of thunder interrupted the moment. Looking up, she saw dark clouds gathering on the horizon, moving quickly their way. Storm's coming, Quincy observed, beginning to pack up the remains of their picnic. We should head back. They hurried toward the ranch, but the storm moved faster than anticipated. Large raindrops began to fall when they were still a good distance from the cabins. By the time they reached the main house porch, they were both soaked to the skin, laughing as they shook water from their hair. So much for our peaceful evening, Katie said, wringing water from her skirt. I don't know, Quincy replied, looking at her with warmth in his eyes. I'd say it was pretty perfect until Mother Nature intervened. Their gazes held, and Katie felt her heart quicken. For a moment she thought he might step closer, might even kiss her. Instead, he cleared his throat and looked away. You should get into dry clothes before you catch cold, he said. I'll walk you to your cabin. Disappointment mingled with relief in Katie's chest. Whatever was growing between them was complicated by her condition, by her past. Perhaps it was better to let it develop slowly, if at all. As they stood on her small porch, protected from the now pouring rain, Quincy handed her the picnic basket. Thank you for this evening, Katie said sincerely. It was lovely. We'll do it again, Quincy promised. He hesitated, then leaned forward and placed a gentle kiss on her forehead. Good night, Katherine. Good night, Quincy, she replied, her skin tingling where his lips had touched. As she watched him dash through the rain toward the main house, Katie pressed her fingers to her forehead, wondering what future might be possible for a fallen woman, and the quiet rancher, who seemed to see beyond her mistakes to the person she truly was. August brought the first stirrings of life within Katie's womb, tiny fluttering movements that at first she mistook for nervousness. When she realized what it was, she was sitting at the kitchen table with Maria, helping to shell peas. Her hand flew to her growing belly and a small gasp escaped her lips. Maria looked up, immediately understanding. A smile spread across her weathered face. The baby moves, Katie nodded, tears springing to her eyes. It's real, she whispered. There's really a little person in there. Maria reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Of course there is, Nina. A blessing from God, no matter what anyone says. That evening, Katie sat on her porch, hands resting on her belly, hoping to feel the movement again. The sound of boots on the path made her look up to see Quincy approaching, his expression curious. Evening, he greeted. Mind if I join you? Please, she gestured to the second chair Maria had insisted on bringing to the porch last month. Quincy sat, his long legs stretched before him. You're looking happy tonight. Katie couldn't contain her smile. I felt the baby move today, for the first time. Something softened in Quincy's face. That must be something special. It is, like nothing I've ever experienced. She hesitated, then asked impulsively, Would you like to feel? It's not moving now, but it might again. Quincy's eyes widened slightly. I wouldn't want to intrude. It's not an intrusion. I'd like to share it with you. After a moment's hesitation, he moved his chair closer and, with infinite gentleness, placed his large hand on the swell of her abdomen. They sat in silence, the evening sounds of the ranch surrounding them, distant lowing of cattle, crickets beginning their nightly chorus, the soft nickering of horses in the barn. Just as Quincy was about to withdraw his hand, the baby moved again, a definite flutter beneath his palm. His eyes flew to Katie's face, wonder replacing uncertainty. Was that, Katie nodded, her own joy reflected in his expression. That's the baby. Incredible, Quincy breathed, his hand lingering. A miracle, really. Yes, Katie agreed softly. A miracle. Something shifted between them in that moment, a connection forged through shared wonder at the mystery of new life. When Quincy finally removed his hand, he did so reluctantly, and the absence of his touch left Katie feeling strangely bereft. "Katherine," he began, his voice low and serious. "I've been wanting to ask you something." Her heart quickened. "Yes, the baby will need a father." Katie stared at him, hardly daring to breathe. Was he suggesting what she thought? "I know this isn't conventional," Quincy continued, looking down at his hands. "And I know you might not feel the same way, but I've come to care for you deeply these past months. More than care, if I'm being honest." He looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "I'd like to marry you, Katherine, be a father to your child, build a life together here on the ranch." Tears filled Katie's eyes, emotions overwhelming her. Joy, fear, disbelief, hope all warred within her heart. "Quincy," she managed to say, "you don't have to do this. I'm not your responsibility." "This isn't about responsibility," he said firmly. "It's about how I feel when I'm with you. How right it seems to have you here, to see you in the garden or at the dinner table. I've never felt this way about anyone before." "But the baby will be mine in every way that matters," he interrupted. "I don't care who fathered it. I'll love this child because it's part of you." A tear slid down Katie's cheek. "What about Willits, the church? Everyone will know the child came too early." Quincy shrugged. "Let them talk. We don't need their approval to be happy." "Are you sure, Quincy, really sure? Because once you do this, there's no going back." He reached for her hand, enveloping it in his own. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Katherine Porter. Will you marry me?" The simple declaration broke the final barrier around Katie's heart. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Quincy's face transformed with joy. He leaned forward and for the first time pressed his lips gently to hers. The kiss was tender, reverent, a promise of the love and respect he would always show her. When they finally parted, Quincy kept her hand in his. "I know it's fast." "We can wait if you want." "No," Katie interrupted. "I don't want to wait. Life is too uncertain for waiting when you know something is right." Quincy nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Then we'll go to Sacramento next week. Find a judge, make it official." They sat together on the porch until the stars emerged, planning their future, dreaming of the life they would build together. For Katie, who had once thought all hope was lost, it seemed a miracle beyond imagining that her darkest hour had led her to a man who saw her worth beyond society's harsh judgment, who offered love without conditions. As promised, Quincy and Katie traveled to Sacramento the following week. They were married in a simple ceremony with only the judge and his wife as witnesses. Katie wore a new dress of soft blue muslin that Maria had helped her make, with white lace at the collar and cuffs. Quincy, in his best suit, looked both nervous and determined as he recited his vows. "I, Quincy James Larson, take you, Katherine Elizabeth Porter, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." As Katie repeated her own vows, she marveled at how life could change so completely in such a short time. From despair to hope, from rejection to acceptance, from shame to love, the journey had been unexpected but had led her to where she was meant to be. The judge pronounced them husband and wife, and Quincy kissed her tenderly before slipping a simple gold band onto her finger, his mother's ring. He told her earlier, preserved for the woman he would one day love as his father had loved her. They spent 2 days in Sacramento, staying in a respectable hotel where Quincy insisted on carrying her across the threshold of their room. despite her advancing pregnancy. Their wedding night was beautiful. Quincy's tenderness and patience helping Katie overcome her nervousness and discover the joy that physical love could bring when shared with someone who truly cherished her. Upon their return to the ranch, Maria and Emmanuel had organized a small celebration. The bunkhouse table had been moved outside under the oak trees, decorated with wildflowers and candles. The ranch hands, dressed in their Sunday best, cheered when Quincy introduced Mrs. Larson for the first time. There was music from Jose's fiddle, dancing despite Katie's awkward shape, and laughter that continued well into the evening. Later, as they lay together in Quincy's now their bedroom in the main house, Katie nestled against her husband's side, listening to his steady heartbeat. "Happy," he murmured, stroking her hair. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied truthfully. "Are you happier than I have words to express?" He placed his hand on her rounded belly, a gesture that had become natural between them. "I keep thinking about what might have happened if I hadn't ridden past the church that day." Katie shuddered slightly. "I don't like to think about it. It feels like fate brought us together. Fate, divine intervention, or just plain luck. Whatever it was, I'm grateful." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Get some sleep, Mrs. Larson. You and the little one need your rest, Mrs. Larson." The name still sounded strange to her ears, but wonderfully right. As she drifted towards sleep in the safety of her husband's arms, Katie offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the man who had opened not just his door, but his heart, when she'd needed it most. September passed in a blur of domestic happiness for the newlyweds. Quincy insisted on moving Katie's belongings into the main house, though she maintained the garden she'd come to love. As her pregnancy advanced, he became increasingly protective, fretting when she exerted herself too much and constantly checking that she was comfortable. "You're worse than a mother hen," Katie teased one evening as he adjusted pillows behind her back for the third time. "Just taking care of what's precious to me," he replied, unashamed of his hovering. In early October, Katie was folding laundry when she heard the sound of an approaching wagon. Looking out the window, she saw Dr. Sullivan climbing down from his buggy, medical bag in hand. Her heart jumped. Had something happened in town? Quincy met the doctor on the porch, and Katie hurried to join them, one hand supporting her now prominent belly. "Dr. Sullivan," she greeted, anxiety evident in her voice. "Is everything all right?" The older man smiled warmly. "Everything's fine, Mrs. Larson. Your husband here rode into town yesterday to ask if I might come check on you and the little one. Seems he's concerned about whether you should be traveling to Willits for your confinement when the time comes." Relief washed over Katie. She looked at Quincy, who appeared slightly embarrassed. "I should have told you I was going to ask him," he admitted. "Didn't want to worry you if he couldn't come." "It's no trouble at all," Dr. Sullivan assured them. "Let's have a look at the mother-to-be, shall we?" In the privacy of their bedroom, Dr. Sullivan examined Katie thoroughly, asking questions about her health, diet, and the baby's movements. When finished, he pronounced both mother and child to be in excellent condition. "The baby's position is good and you're carrying well," he informed her as she readjusted her clothing. "I see no reason why you shouldn't deliver here at the ranch, if that's what you prefer. First babies often take their time, but with proper preparation, we should manage just fine." "Here," Katie repeated, surprised. She'd assumed she'd need to go to town when her time came. "Your husband's already asked me to stay at the ranch for a few days around your due date in December, Dr. Sullivan explained. "Maria Ramirez has experience as a midwife, so between us, you'll have excellent care." Tears of gratitude filled Katie's eyes. Once again, Quincy had anticipated her needs, making arrangements to ensure her comfort and safety. After the doctor left with a promise to return in November, Katie found Quincy in his study going over the ranch accounts. "Thank you," she said simply from the doorway. He looked up, his expression questioning. "For what?" "For bringing Dr. Sullivan. For arranging everything so I can have the baby here, where I feel safe." She crossed to where he sat and placed her hand on his cheek. "For always thinking of ways to make things easier for me." Quincy turned his head to kiss her palm. "Nothing's more important to me than you and our child." Our child. The words warmed Katie's heart. From the moment he'd proposed, Quincy had referred to the baby as theirs, never making any distinction that might suggest he saw the child as anything other than his own. "Dr. Sullivan says everything looks good," she told him, perching carefully on the edge of his desk. "The baby's growing well and my health is excellent." Relief washed over Quincy's features. "That's good to hear. I've been worried." A knock at the front door interrupted his words. They exchanged curious glances. Unexpected visitors were rare at the ranch. "I'll get it," Quincy said, rising from his chair. Katie followed him to the entryway, hanging back slightly as he opened the door. Standing on the porch, looking uncomfortable and out of place, was Pastor Wilkins from the First Baptist Church. "Mr. Larson," the pastor greeted stiffly. "Mrs. Larson," he added, his eyes widening slightly as they took in Katie's obviously pregnant form. "Pastor," Quincy acknowledged coolly. "What brings you out to the ranch?" The older man cleared his throat. "May I come in? I have a matter of some importance to discuss." After a moment's hesitation, Quincy stepped aside, allowing the pastor to enter. Katie's heart hammered in her chest. She hadn't seen anyone from her old life since the day she'd been cast out of the church. They settled in the parlor, an uncomfortable silence hanging in the air until Pastor Wilkins finally spoke. "I'll come straight to the point," he said, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "The church council has been discussing your situation, Mrs. Larson. While your indiscretion was indeed sinful, your subsequent marriage has somewhat rectified the moral failing." He paused, his expression pained. "In light of Mr. Larson's standing in the community as a successful rancher, and considering your previous years of faithful service to the church, the council is prepared to welcome you back into the congregation. With certain conditions, of course." Katie sat frozen, unable to believe what she was hearing. After all the shame and judgment they had heaped upon her, now they were willing to welcome her back because she had married a man of means. Quincy's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "What conditions would those be, Pastor?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Pastor Wilkins shifted uncomfortably. "A public acknowledgement of the sin, naturally, repentance before the congregation, and certain restrictions on Mrs. Larson's participation in church activities until a suitable period of penance has passed." Katie felt anger rising within her, not the hot, impulsive kind, but a slow, righteous indignation that burned all the more intensely for its steadiness. "No," she said clearly. Both men looked at her, Pastor Wilkins with surprise, Quincy with what appeared to be pride. "I beg your pardon," the pastor said. "I said no," Katie repeated, her voice growing stronger. "I will not grovel before people who turned their backs on me when I needed them most. I will not label my child a sin or act ashamed of its existence. Mrs. Larson, surely you understand the gravity of what I understand," Katie interrupted, rising to her feet despite her unwieldy shape. "Is that true Christianity is about love and compassion, not judgment and condemnation. When I was cast out by those who claimed to follow Christ's teachings, it was my husband, then a virtual stranger, who showed me what Christian charity truly means." Pastor Wilkins's face reddened. "Now see here." "No, Pastor, you see here." Katie's voice remained calm but unyielding. My child will be raised knowing it is loved unconditionally by both its parents and by God. We will not be returning to First Baptist, not now, not ever." Quincy stood beside her, his arm coming around her waist in silent support. "I believe my wife has made our position clear, Pastor Wilkins. Now, if you'll excuse us, it's getting late." The pastor's expression hardened as he rose. "I see the girl's willfulness has not been tempered by marriage. Very well. But remember, Mrs. Larson, when the gossip follows your child throughout its life in Willits, you had the chance to provide it legitimacy in the community's eyes." "My child will have legitimacy," Katie replied evenly. "It will have the Larson name, a loving home, and parents who see it as a blessing, not a burden of shame. That's all the legitimacy that matters." After Pastor Wilkins had departed, Quincy pulled Katie into his arms, holding her as she trembled with the aftermath of emotion. "I'm proud of you," he murmured against her hair. "Standing up for yourself, for our family. You were magnificent." "I meant every word," she said, her face pressed against his chest. "I don't need their approval anymore. I have everything that matters right here." Quincy tilted her face up to his. "We'll build our own community, Katherine, one based on love and acceptance, not fear and judgment." He kissed her tenderly. "And our child will grow up knowing nothing but that kind of love." As autumn deepened toward winter, the ranch prepared for both the coming cold and the arrival of the baby. Quincy converted a room adjacent to their bedroom into a nursery, surprising Katie by revealing furniture he'd commissioned from a craftsman in Sacramento: a cradle, a rocking chair, and a small chest for baby clothes. "Quincy, it's beautiful," Katie gasped when he showed her the completed room. "When did you arrange all this?" "Been planning it since before we were married," he admitted with a smile. "Wanted everything to be ready." December arrived with unusually heavy rains that turned the ranch roads to mud and kept everyone close to home. As Katie's due date approached, Quincy grew increasingly nervous, checking and rechecking that everything was prepared, clean linen stored nearby, hot water readily available, the fastest horse kept saddled in case Dr. Sullivan needed to be summoned urgently. "You're going to wear yourself out before the baby even gets here," Katie told him one evening as they sat before the fire in their bedroom. "Can't help it," he replied, rubbing her feet as she reclined on the settee. "Just want everything to be perfect for you both." Katie smiled, her hand resting on her enormous belly. "It already is perfect. We have everything we need." 3 days later, in the pre-dawn hours of December 15, 1883, Katie woke to a sharp pain and the sensation of wetness between her thighs. For a moment, she lay still, uncertain. Then another pain gripped her, and she knew with certainty that their child was ready to enter the world. "Quincy," she whispered, shaking her husband's shoulder gently. "It's time." The next 12 hours passed in a blur of pain, determination, and finally, overwhelming joy. True to his word, Dr. Sullivan arrived promptly, having stayed in the guest room for the past week. Maria proved invaluable, her calm presence and practical knowledge helping Katie through the worst of the labor. And Quincy, despite the doctor's initial attempts to send him away as was customary, refused to leave his wife's side, holding her hand and wiping her brow throughout the ordeal. "One more push, Mrs. Larson," Dr. Sullivan encouraged as the winter sun began to set outside the bedroom window. "Your baby's almost here." With a final, monumental effort, Katie bore down, and moments later, a lusty cry filled the room. "A boy," the doctor announced triumphantly. "A fine, healthy son." Tears streamed down Katie's face as the squalling, red-faced infant was placed on her chest. "Hello, little one," she whispered, her exhaustion forgotten in the wonder of the moment. "We've been waiting for you." Quincy, his own eyes wet with tears, leaned down to place a gentle kiss on his wife's forehead, then marveled at the tiny fingers that wrapped instinctively around his larger one when he touched his son's hand. "He's perfect," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Just like his mother." After the baby was cleaned and swaddled and Katie made comfortable, Dr. Sullivan and Maria discreetly withdrew, leaving the new family to become acquainted. "What shall we call him?" Quincy asked, perched on the edge of the bed as Katie nursed their son for the first time. They had discussed names but had never settled on one, wanting to meet their child before making the final decision. Katie studied the baby's face, his shock of dark hair, his button nose, the determined set of his tiny mouth. "Samuel," she said softly. "It means God has heard. Because he heard my prayers when I thought all was lost, and he led me to you." "Samuel Larson," Quincy tested the name, then nodded. "It suits him." He reached out to stroke the downy head. "Samuel James Larson, after my father." "Perfect," Katie agreed, her heart so full of love she thought it might burst. As twilight deepened outside their window, the small family remained wrapped in their private cocoon of joy, marveling at the miracle that had brought them together and the new life that represented their hope for the future. News of Samuel's birth spread quickly through the ranch and to the neighboring properties. Visitors began arriving the following day, ranch hands, wives bringing food and knitted blankets, neighbors offering congratulations and small gifts for the baby. Even Dr. Sullivan's wife made the journey from Willits, bringing a beautiful christening gown she had sewn herself. The ladies of the church wanted to send gifts, she confided to Katie as they sat in the parlor, Samuel sleeping peacefully in his mother's arms. "I told them they'd miss their chance to show Christian charity when it mattered most." Katie smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan. Your support means a great deal." The doctor's wife patted her hand. "My dear, what that church did to you was wrong." Many in town feel the same way, even if they've been afraid to say so openly. This revelation surprised Katie. She'd assumed all of Willits had condemned her. "Really? Really? And now that you're Mrs. Larson with a beautiful baby boy, I suspect you'll find quite a few doors open to you in town, should you choose to venture back." Katie considered this. Part of her had no desire to return to the place that had caused her such pain, but another part recognized that isolation wasn't the answer either. Perhaps, with Quincy and Samuel beside her, she could reclaim her place in the wider community, not as a penitent seeking forgiveness, but as a woman who had found her own path to happiness. As Samuel grew from newborn to infant, the little family established their routines. Quincy proved to be a devoted father, seemingly never tiring of holding his son or walking the floor with him during fussy nights. Katie often found him in the nursery in the early morning hours. Samuel cradled against his broad chest as he told the baby stories about the ranch and plans for his future. "He'll need a pony when he's old enough," Quincy mused one spring morning as they watched Samuel, now 4 months old, kick energetically on a blanket in the garden. "Something gentle to start with," Katie laughed. "He can't even sit up yet. Let's not rush him into the saddle." Quincy grinned, pulling her close to his side. "Just planning ahead. A rancher's son needs to start early." "And if he doesn't want to be a rancher," Katie teased, "what if he wants to be a doctor like Dr. Sullivan or a lawyer in Sacramento?" "Then he'll be the best educated doctor or lawyer in California," Quincy replied without hesitation. "All I want is for him to be happy." Katie turned in his arms, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "You're a wonderful father, Quincy Larson. Samuel is lucky to have you." "I'm the lucky one," he responded, his eyes serious. "You both gave me the family I never thought I'd have." As spring turned to summer, Katie began making occasional trips into Willits with Quincy and Samuel. As Mrs. Sullivan had predicted, many doors that had once been closed to her now opened, though Katie was selective about which threshold she crossed. The general store where she'd once worked welcomed her warmly, the owner cooing over Samuel and refusing payment for the baby's first pair of shoes. Others, like the pastor's wife who sniffed disapprovingly when they passed on the street, were easy to ignore with Quincy's solid presence beside her and Samuel's sweet weight in her arms. One warm June day, as they were leaving the mercantile, Katie came face to face with her father for the first time since her banishment. He stood frozen on the boardwalk, staring at the grandson he'd never met. "Katherine," he finally acknowledged stiffly. "Father," she replied, her voice steady though her heart raced. His eyes moved to Samuel, who was watching his grandfather with curious blue eyes. Something flickered in the older man's expression, longing, perhaps, or regret. "He looks like your brother did at that age," he observed quietly. Katie hadn't expected this softening. "His name is Samuel," she offered. "Samuel James Larson." Her father nodded once. "A good name." He glanced at Quincy, who stood protectively at Katie's side. "You're taking care of them with everything I have," Quincy replied firmly. Another nod, then her father's eyes returned to Katie's face. "Your mother would like to see you and the boy if you're amenable." Tears pricked at Katie's eyes. She'd missed her mother desperately, but had assumed that door was permanently closed. "I would like that," she managed to say. "Sunday afternoon, perhaps. She'll be home from church by 2. "We'll be there," Katie promised. As her father walked away, Quincy squeezed her hand. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she said, surprised to find it was true. "I think I am." The reunion with her mother that Sunday was emotional, but healing. Elizabeth Porter cried when she held her grandson for the first time, apologizing repeatedly for not standing up to her husband when Katie needed her support. "I was wrong," she admitted tearfully. "So terribly wrong to let him send you away. Can you ever forgive me?" "I already have, Mother," Katie assured her, understanding now that her mother's own life had been constrained by the same rigid expectations that had nearly crushed her. While the relationship with her father remained formal and somewhat distant, regular visits with her mother became part of their routine. Elizabeth often came to the ranch, delighting in watching Samuel grow and developing a respectful friendship with Quincy, who made sure she was always welcome. "You've made a good life," she told Katie one afternoon as they watched Quincy teaching 7-month-old Samuel to pet a gentle old mare. "A beautiful life." "Yes," Katie agreed, her heart full, "though it's not the one I expected." "The best things rarely are what we expect," her mother observed wisely. As Samuel's first birthday approached, Katie found herself increasingly reflective about the journey that had brought them to this point. One evening, after putting the baby to bed, she joined Quincy on the porch swing where they often sat to enjoy the peaceful end of the day. "I've been thinking," she said as he draped his arm around her shoulders. "About this time last year," Quincy nodded, understanding immediately. "When you thought everything was falling apart." "Yes. When in reality, everything was just beginning." She leaned her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I was so scared that day, standing outside the church with nowhere to go. I couldn't see how anything good could come from such a painful moment. And now," Quincy prompted gently, "now I see that sometimes our greatest blessings come from our darkest hours." She looked up at him, love welling in her heart. "If I hadn't been cast out that day, I might never have found my way to you, to this life we've built together." Quincy tightened his arm around her. "I thank God every day that I happened to ride past that church at exactly the right moment." "You think it was just chance, or something more?" He considered this. I'm not sure I believe in coincidence, not for the important things. I believe we were meant to find each other one way or another. Katie smiled, settling back against him. So do I. They sat in companionable silence as the first stars appeared in the twilight sky. In the nursery, Samuel slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge even at his young age that he was deeply loved. In the barn, the ranch horses nickered softly as Emmanuel made his evening rounds. And in the main house, a lamp burned welcome in the window, just as Quincy had promised on that fateful day when he'd offered shelter to a desperate young woman. "My door is always open," he had said, not knowing then that his heart would soon follow. Now, as Katie Porter Larson sat wrapped in the embrace of the man who had become her husband, father to her child, and partner in all things, she offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the journey that had brought her home not to a place, but to a love that had transformed her life in ways she could never have imagined. "I love you, Quincy Larson," she whispered, tilting her face up to his. His kiss was gentle, reverent, filled with the promise of all the years stretching before them. "And I love you, Katherine Larson, now and always." In the years that followed, the Larson ranch prospered, as did the family that called it home. Samuel grew into a strong, kind boy with his mother's gentle spirit and his father's quiet determination. He was joined by two siblings, a sister, Elizabeth Maria, born on a snowy December night 2 years after Samuel, and another brother, Joseph Emmanuel, who arrived in the spring of 1888. Katie's relationship with Willits gradually transformed. Though she never returned to First Baptist Church, she and Quincy began attending a small non-denominational service held in a neighboring rancher's home, where the focus was on God's love rather than human judgment. Over time, this gathering grew into a proper congregation that eventually built its own modest chapel, with Quincy serving on the building committee. Katie found her own way to serve the community that had once rejected her. Drawing on her experience, she opened her home to other women in difficult circumstances, offering temporary shelter and practical support. Some stayed a few days, others months, but all found the same unconditional acceptance that Quincy had once offered Katie. "You're changing lives," Quincy told her one evening after a young widow and her infant son had moved on to a fresh start in Sacramento, equipped with skills Katie had taught her and connections Quincy had provided. "I'm just passing on what was given to me," Katie replied. A chance to start over, to see beyond the immediate crisis to the possibilities ahead. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the Larson family witnessed remarkable changes in the world around them. Willits grew from a small logging town into a bustling community with a railroad station of its own. Samuel, now a young man of 18, prepared to attend the University of California in Berkeley, planning to study agricultural science to bring modern techniques back to the ranch. On the evening before his departure, Katie found him in the garden where she still spent many happy hours, sitting on the bench beneath the oak tree that had grown from a sapling she'd planted when he was small. "May I join you?" she asked, seeing the pensive expression on his face. Samuel smiled, making room on the bench. At 18, he was the image of Quincy in build and coloring, though his gentle manner and expressive eyes were pure Katie. "Just thinking about tomorrow," he admitted as she sat beside him. "About leaving home." "Nervous?" she asked. "A little." "Mostly excited." He looked around at the ranch that had been his whole world. "But I'll miss this place, miss you and Pa and the little ones." Katie took his hand. "This will always be your home, Samuel, no matter where life takes you." He nodded, then turned to face her with unusual seriousness. "Ma, there's something I've been wanting to ask you, something I've wondered about for a long time." Katie's heart skipped a beat. Though they had never hidden the circumstances of Samuel's birth from him, they hadn't discussed it in detail either, waiting for him to ask when he was ready. "You can ask me anything," she assured him. Samuel took a deep breath. "My real father, the man in Willits, did you ever hear from him again? Did he ever know about me?" Katie shook her head. "No, sweetheart. James Harrington was a railroad surveyor passing through town. By the time I knew about you, he was long gone. I never heard from him again." "Do you ever wonder what happened to him?" "Sometimes," Katie admitted, "but not in the way you might think. I hope he found happiness somewhere, but I've never regretted that he wasn't part of our lives." Samuel was quiet for a moment, processing this. "Pa has always been my real father," he finally said. "In every way that matters." "Yes, he has," Katie agreed, tears pricking at her eyes. "From the very first moment he held you, you were his son, completely and unconditionally. The way he tells the story about finding you outside the church, it almost sounds like he was looking for you before he even knew you existed." Katie smiled at this insight. "Sometimes I think he was, just as I was waiting for him without knowing it." "I'm glad you found each other," Samuel said, squeezing her hand. "And I'm proud to be a Larson, Ma. Really proud." As twilight deepened around them, Katie heard Quincy calling from the house that supper was ready. Samuel helped her to her feet, and together they walked toward the warm glow of home, where the rest of their family awaited. Later that night, after the children were asleep and the house quiet, Katie stood on the porch looking up at the star-filled sky, much as she had on that first night at the ranch when her future had seemed so uncertain. She felt Quincy's arms encircle her from behind, his chin resting on the top of her head. "Penny for your thoughts," he murmured. "I was thinking about journeys," she replied, leaning back against his solid warmth. "How the most difficult ones often lead us exactly where we need to be." "Having second thoughts about letting Samuel go to Berkeley?" Quincy asked. "No," Katie said. "He needs to find his own path just as we did." She turned in his arms to face him. "I was actually thinking about us, about that day outside the church." Quincy's expression softened as it always did when they spoke of their beginning. "Best day of my life, though I didn't know it at the time." "Mine too, eventually," Katie agreed with a smile, "though it certainly didn't feel that way in the moment." "And now?" Quincy asked, tucking a strand of her hair, still brown but threaded with silver now, behind her ear. "Now I understand that what looked like an ending was really just the beginning of everything that mattered." She rose on tiptoe to kiss him, this man who had opened his door and his heart when she'd needed it most. "And I wouldn't change a single step of the journey that brought me to you." As they stood together beneath the vast canopy of stars, the ranch quiet around them, Katie Porter Larson reflected on the perfect, imperfect path that had led her to this moment, to this life filled with love, purpose, and the abiding joy of knowing she was exactly where she was meant to be. The door that had opened for her on that desperate day remained open, still not just a physical shelter, but a gateway to the kind of love that transforms, heals, and endures through all of life's seasons. It was a love born in the most unexpected circumstances, nurtured through challenges and joys alike, and now woven so thoroughly into the fabric of their family that Katie could no longer imagine life any other way. And in the end, isn't that what coming home truly means? Not returning to where you began, but arriving where you always belonged.